Do you want me to bring us in?
Yeah, you've done more research than me, so
Well, I've literally been doing
that's
it.
more than me. I watched it on BBC News. That was it.
Yeah. Okay. Hi everybody, and welcome back to the Renewables Podcast. Thank you very much for coming back and joining us on another episode. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, then please head over and press the follow button on YouTube and Instagram. Instagram. Yeah, well, my head's everywhere today. On YouTube and on Spotify. And yeah, follow our progress and follow what we're doing in terms of all the episodes. We've got some really cool guests coming on, and we can't wait to share those with you. But I'll pass over to Mark before I make any other mistakes this early on. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm good, mate. It's my job to make the mistakes, so you're allowed one every now and then. But yeah, really good. Busy out in the day job as always. It's been a wet one this week, got to be honest. We got absolutely soaked yesterday. Well, the guy's more than me, because I was in the garage doing the really important work, the drying one.
Work.
But yeah, it's one of those, isn't it, this time of year? You can't do nothing about the weather.
Yeah, we've been fairly lucky recently not getting too caught up in it or managing to like work around it and still having plenty to do that we can move things inside. But yeah, it is real tricky when you are reliant on working outside. But we battle on. We'll be moaning about how it's too hot, won't we, in a few months' time, hopefully.
I'm looking forward to the customers passing ice lollies out the windows again rather than offering umbrellas.
God, you have better customers than us. Yeah, no, it'd be good fun, and I know the guys are working hard to try and get all the projects over the line during the weather. I'm out in Gothland tomorrow, and that's supposed to be quite wet, so it's going to be fun. But no, all good on our side. It sounds like it's good on your side, and we're going to talk about something that has literally just been released. So there'll probably be a follow-up episode to this, and it's all about the Warm Homes Grant or Warm Homes Plan, which has been talked about for a little while. I think 2024 they first kind of really started talking about it, and it's just been released. Well, it officially went onto the government website yesterday. So it'd be interesting to see how that develops, because there's a lot of fluff in it at the minute as I've kind of been scanning through it and having a look. But it'll be, as everything, it's about the implementation. And it'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, it will. And all these policy documents that come out are just confusing, aren't they? I find them befuddling, going back into the history of anything to do with the government, from the EV charge point grants they did, and making sense of it. It's so difficult. It's like, why can't you just write a little booklet in plain English that makes sense to everyone? And you've got these things that are hundreds of pages long. Maybe getting Jason from the ESA to come back in with his contacts into government. He might be able to explain it to us in some sort of terms we understand. But yeah, I thought we should do our best with it. I've only really seen what's been on the news and read a little bit around that 3 or 4 days ago. I know you've put a bit of time in today to try and figure out what's going on, but it'd be interesting to see the meat on the bones with it all, isn't it? Because the worry can be that sometimes it's really difficult to even access the funding, both as a consumer but also as an installer. So it'd be interesting to see how that rolls around each way around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the key thing, because we've seen things like OLEV, and kind of the pain points that we had very early on with that in terms of accessing that money, and there've been big backlogs, and they kind of got it sorted by, I mean, it's still around for certain installations, isn't it? But they kind of got their act together and made that a little bit better from what I could see. But it's the implementation is a massive thing, and I think as I've been going through this document, it's kind of like, it's quite exciting in terms of they're unleashing it for more stuff. So they're unleashing it for solar PV and battery. We've already got the boiler upgrade scheme for air source heat pumps, but it's trying to get some sort of funding to help people with solar and battery. But one of the big things that I've had a look at in this document, and it's 150 pages long, and I have to confess I've not read 150 pages of it, is that they're kind of looking to try and give people or try and enable people to have a bit of a package. So rather than necessarily people just getting an air source heat pump, and everybody kind of out there in the industry, and the best advice out there is kind of saying, well, solar and battery, certainly battery will work really well to help with the running costs of that air source heat pump. and trying to see kind of a solar battery and an air source heat pump as almost one, not one technology, but one installation. But one of the big issues with that is the cost of the upfront cost of it. And I think when people are getting air source heat pumps because their boilers may be dying or they're wanting to, just go all electric, one of the big and fair criticisms of air source heat pumps in certain circumstances is that they use a good amount of power, quite a lot of power. And in an ideal world, everybody would kind of transition their home to have an air source heat pump and have solar and battery to then try and offset some of that additional cost. You're obviously making all of the gas and the oil saving by not having the air source heat and not having the gas or oil boiler, but trying to see homes as having one renewable system that consists of solar, battery, and an air source heat pump rather than them all just being separate. That's kind of the gist that I get out of this document. And so that's quite exciting because that opens potentially funding for people to try and get everything all in one go, which most people would like to do anyway.
Yeah, there's the hassle and upheaval of having it done, isn't there? And you're right with the heat pumps. It's more about decarbonising than financial return. Imagine that proposing kit to customers and you don't have to worry about RTI on things. They're living the dream, those guys and girls. But elevating solar and battery with that as a realistic prospect has got to be a good thing, I think, to enable more people to have these heat pumps and get that driving forward. Because I think the government have committed to that decarbonising heating. That's their big policy, isn't it? Certainly with the Labour Party now, and I think the Conservatives before, to be fair to them, they were doing similar things, and the financial around that doesn't really play out for consumers because of that big upfront cost, and the running costs are comparable in the best circumstances, aren't they, roughly speaking. So I think there's a move there to try and incorporate batteries to make it more financially viable for people. But again, you're just putting that upfront cost there ever higher. And our customer this week actually had his heat pump installed, I think a month ago. And he's had those painful bills coming through from his heat pump, and he was almost on the edge of asking us to put a couple of extra batteries in because it was using so much power while it's been really cold. We had those big cold snap, didn't we, where it snowed and stuff, and I think he was using like 40 units a day, something which was way beyond what he was anticipating. But he's seen as it's warmed up a bit the last week or two that's actually dropped away. So it's going through those kind of journeys as consumers as well, and using this stuff plays out into the decisions they might make. But yeah, he's very relieved now to have his battery running alongside it, where he can take advantage of the lower cost tariff options through the winter. And the middle classes and wealthier people have the luxury of choice with that. They can structure finance to work with those offerings presently. But for the mass adoption phase that we've spoken about before, people just aren't in that position to make those choices, and they're kind of been restricted in what they can access, I suppose. And if the government are packaging this stuff up in a way that helps that, whilst delivering quality as well and not just rushed system installs, that's something we can come back to later, I'm sure. I think that's got to be a good thing. It's just how easy it is for people to navigate and understand and go through the process of getting those grants, I suppose. And we don't know the inner nuts and bolts of all this yet, do we?
No, and I think that's right. It's trying to unlock some of this stuff for people that are not in kind of the upper 10, 20% in society as well, because, in reality, most of my customers are kind of at that point where they can afford to drop, 15, 20 grand into something like this. And whilst that's most majority of them, I would say, have worked very hard for that money. And I'm not saying they don't deserve it, or don't deserve success in business and whatever else however else they've accumulated that. But it's a case of those high bills to them isn't necessarily as much of a benefit by reducing them than it would be for someone that is literally on the breadline, that is really struggling for, to make ends meet, and actually removing that X amount of £100 per month that they're spending on electricity and gas or oil to run their house. Like, that's almost like a pay rise for them, because it's so much more proportional to what they earn, rather than maybe someone that's earning a lot of money that, as like I say, has worked hard and it deserves to, but equally their £200-300 a month bill is a much lower percentage of what they earn than someone that's on minimum wage that's just struggling to keep things ticking over. So I think what will be interesting is, and it's always on the actual delivery of this stuff, like you've mentioned, will be how it's rolled out and what the different levels of funding are. Because from what I can see, it looks like there's going to be potentially different bands for different levels of funding. So some people that are obviously on the lower end of the pay scale may even get this thing fully funded through this. And they're putting decent money into it. It's not like they're just putting a couple of million in. They're putting, just reading here, additional 600 million for low-income households to receive funding for the full cost of solar panels and batteries, taking the total available to 5 billion. So it is a hell of an investment in a government and in a country that I'm sure is trying to count every penny at the minute, because it's, we are struggling in terms of growth and everything in the country. So to put this into something like solar and battery, I'm sure we'll get a lot of criticism, because it's not necessarily directly impacting on the growth of the UK. But, and this gets a little bit deep, but it's kind of like, how you assess wealth in a country is not always just about what people are taking home and what people are earning. It's about kind of their standard of living as well. And I'm not here as an advocate for the Labour Party, but I'm kind of like, anything that starts to help people be warmer, it's the Warm Homes Plan, but just feel more comfortable in their homes and probably happier in their homes, surely is actually adding wealth to the country. Yes, it's not going to change GDP as such, but it's actually making people feel better, and it's how you value kind of wealth. And I think feeling comfortable and happy and safe in your own home is something that not all the world has. And so something like this, I think, is a good thing to try and help that. But like you've said, it's going to be dependent a lot on the delivery of it, how we access as installers the money, and how arduous that is for us. Because we've seen things like this scheme happen before, haven't we?
Yeah, there's historical things in our industry and outside of it. There's the insulation stuff where they were spraying all that foam over people's loft spaces that we come across sometimes when we're surveying jobs, and cavity wall insulation. That was a big government-funded initiative, probably of the 2000s, wasn't it, where that was really taking off. And we've had the Buzz Grant now. I think they've extended the date on that now to 2030 as well. It's like a £15 billion package overall of this Warm Homes scheme, isn't it? And Eco4, I think, was due to end in March this year, but that's been put out to the end of 2026 from what I remember. So they've tweaked around the edges of some of the stuff that's there, and I think the Eco4 is going to still be removed, and the Warm Homes come in to replace it. And yeah, my understanding is the same as yours, that if you're a low-income household, quite what the definition of that ends up being, I'm still not sure, but that would largely be funded by taxpayers, and it is a taxpayer investment, as you've said, and there's the political debate around that, if it is a good decision or not. That's for policymakers to decide, and I guess that's what they get paid for. And then you kind of middle classes, if you like, would be having access to finance agreements that the government are maybe covering off the interest elements and securing the funding for the lenders who are going to be involved, so they know they're not going to lose the money, I guess, a bit like they did with COVID loans with businesses. I think it probably functions something along that kind of lines. And yeah, it'd just be interesting to see where all the lines in the sand sit with that, and the actual process of where the money goes and how it gets to where it ends up. Because again, talking about the EV charger one, that was a mess sometimes, where we were waiting 16 odd weeks and longer to get our money through, which with solar PV and battery storage systems is going to be a deal breaker for lots of installers. That just won't work. So they need to have their admin around that buttoned down and watertight to make sure it can be a success. But yeah, that's the issue with any kind of government investment. Generally, you get a lot of sales tactics and companies that spring up, and you've been through it with the feed-in tariff era of solar and the solar coaster that you've ridden ever since. And is this going to be another jolt to the top of the coaster before we get shot back down it again, or could we use this investment to really grow the skills that we want to see in industry? Thinking with my training hat on and the talk of all the new apprenticeship placements we need for these skilled job roles, they're saying 180,000 extra jobs. So it's like the GDP argument, it's all well and good, but it's creating jobs and employment prospects for people if it's done right.
Yeah, it is, and done right in the sense of rolling it out correctly, but actually ensuring the quality of the installs are done right as well. Because I'm just reading there whilst you were saying about all of that, and the insulation funding's been downgraded as well. And I think what we heard on the on the news and everything about the whole rollout of this insulation thing, it sounds on the face of it such a great idea to try and insulate more homes and lock that heat in before you do anything. Try and make that home more efficient and warmer, just as it stands. But the issue is if these things go unchecked, and you end up introducing problems. Like I know they ended up introducing damp problems to quite a few houses because these things weren't being done correctly or surveyed correctly or whatever. That actually the whole mechanism behind it starts to get criticised, and things will always be jobs that don't go well or unforeseen problems, but they have to be in the under the 1% of jobs so that you can easily defend that. Like if you end up having quite a lot of the jobs causing problems on those homes, then suddenly it detracts from all of the homes where it's been done correctly by reputable installers, and it then drives those reputable installers away from doing it. So then it all spirals downhill. We have seen a lot with these Eco4 schemes and all these different ways that they've tried to fund the whole kind of air source heat pump thing and the insulation side of things and just the green side of things. It always seems to attract the type of installers that want to do it as quickly and as cheaply as possible, rather than spending what is a very small sum of that 55 billion and actually trying to make it appeal to the installers that will take a huge amount of pride in their work. And when you buy a council house, like my house is an ex-council house, and everything was rock solid in it. There was nothing like the roof. We've recently redone our roof and insulated the loft and everything, but everything is just done to really high quality. And I'm kind of looking at it thinking, I've been in new builds that are worse than this, and I just feel like anything we do, we've got to go right back to the fundamentals of the training, like you were mentioning, Matt, but the fundamentals of what will make this solar PV, battery storage, air source heat pump insulation system or product last the longest. And one of the main issues with it is when it's not installed with care or thought as to where it goes and cable management and all those basic things that most installers or plumbers for the sort of pipe management, if you like how those things are thought about. And if you're working for the type of company, or you're running the type of company that is working on extremely small margins with no time in the job to actually spend to take pride in it, then unfortunately the whole thing comes crashing down, because it's not, you don't have to look too far in the future until all this scheme gets criticised, because these problems have been, there's been kind of things taken for granted and things not being done properly, and they therefore cause problems with the system that could have been done properly with an extra day, but it would obviously have cost more money for you to be there. And that's a worry with any sort of scheme like this. So I'd love Oval to help and to start doing these installs, but it's got to be financially viable for us, and I'm just really hoping it is when we get more details.
Yeah, the proof will be in the pudding with that. And you make a great point about putting people off who have had this stuff installed badly. You see it when air source heat pumps first started to come out, and it was on the news, people complaining that they're not able to get the houses hot enough, the bills going up. And when you actually look at it, it's not the kit that's the problem, it's the way it's been rushed in. And I think whenever you get that government impetus, they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't to a degree, because we complain if there's no government action and then leadership around this stuff. And then when something does come forward, we're saying, like, you're not really considering this. I think there has to be a bit of a reality check from government that they don't know how these industries work best, and they need to engage a bit more with some of the organisations out there who do. And Jason, who came on from the ESA, is maybe in a good place to represent that, maybe in those places. But that's the thing, when they're looking at this as a big scheme and they've got net zero targets and like, we want this number of heat pumps by then, we want this number of EV cars by then, and that number of solar, and it's all about that volume. And doing that doesn't necessarily deliver value. If they actually look at it on a project by project basis, getting best value from that taxpayer funding would take a bit more time. And ultimately, what is that big rush for? It's just the date someone's put 10 years down the road or whenever it is that we're working towards. Someone just probably plucked it out of thin air, sat in a meeting one day. And if we just roll that out of sight and actually focus in a little bit better of what's a realistic achievement on a monthly and a yearly basis to deliver value for taxpayers and people living in their homes, we'd probably get a better job, I think, rather than this rush, rinse, repeat. Just get it in. We need these numbers on the door to say we're hitting our targets and satisfying that policies we've made.
Yeah, I think the targets thing is a really good one, because rather than a target of a date, which again, like you said, the damned if they are and damned if they don't, but rather than a target of a date, which might be, the end of the parliament, so they can actually stand on those figures. In an ideal world, the target would be around quality and around, callbacks to this stuff and issues, trying to roll out a scheme that has minimal issues and therefore is more valuable. Because, if you've had a load of external wall insulation put on and then suddenly you're having damp problems and then you're having to pay someone to come back to take it all off and then reinstall it, how does that make sense when you could have just had somebody charge a little bit more to fit it right in the first place? And I think that's, we do always seem to be in a rush, rather than just taking that time to go, we need to make sure this is going to work properly and it's in the right place and the people have been properly trained, they've got enough time to do the job, and those fundamentals that us in our own businesses, work. We don't price a job based on an amount of time that we know is completely unachievable, because we'd just lose money hand over fist on it. So we've got to focus in on how do we deliver at scale, but with quality being at the top of it. And it mentions about MCS and people like that within the Warm Homes Plan, and we've obviously spoken to Ian a couple of times on the podcast and privately as well. And I think MCS have got a big role to play in this. But again, we see so many installers that are MCS for years and years, they go bust, and suddenly all these problems come out of the woodwork, where you go to a job and you think, this is so far away from being MCS compliant, that how did they ever pass their assessments? And it's the historic, they're all historic cases, but it's kind of, we'll be looking back on some warm home installations and going, well, that was a disaster. Or we're going to look at it and go, that was the turning point when the quality checking and the accountability that installers have to make sure they're doing jobs right steps up. And I really hope it's the latter one.
Yeah, I mean, what an opportunity to improve housing stock in the UK through this scheme, maybe, rather than, there's the political debate. It's happening, whatever people think about that. This is a great opportunity to get into lots of homes and make big improvements in the way that they work and are used. And you're right to raise MCS, because they're very much front and centre of that policy. And I think from what I'd read, some of the other options that currently exist aren't in that frame at the minute. They're kind of been pushed out. So maybe the government are trying to centralise that and focus it all into one place where they can have a bit more control and maybe management of the process. And you do need that. If it is taxpayer funds, there needs to be some sort of oversight as to what's going on. But as you've said, if that oversight is more box ticking than actually meet teeth and driving improved standards, then it doesn't really serve its purpose, doesn't it? So my hope would be that Ian and his team at MCS are going to be on top of all of this. They'll certainly have the work cut out if the scaling is going to go in the way that it's anticipated. And yeah, that's going to be an interesting one. But if you imagine your atypical, I don't know, terraced or semi house, and you're going from a gas boiler to an air source heat pump, and then putting a small battery system in alongside it, maybe, and a few solar panels on the roof. We know now through that process there's the smoke detection element that's going to be covered off, and also a lot of people are still on old fuse wire boards. We still find them everywhere. There's been no upgrades in a lot of these homes for 40, 50 years, and there's an opportunity there to increase safety just through the course of us fitting this stuff. It's not just about the kit that's going in there. We could have more smoke detection, better switch circuit protection on some of the final circuits, testing of owner-occupied housing stock as well that's generally not been done for years and years. So there's some big upsides there, and it's beyond just some of the technologies that have been fitted. I think we need to try and get as much value from that process as we possibly can and make people's homes nicer and safer.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a point I hadn't thought about. You get into the weeds of actually, right, well, to fit this equipment, are we going to be rolling out outdoor consumer units and tagging things on, which I can kind of see why they would probably want to do that, because they go, well, there's a limited amount of funding, we're going to just do the path of least resistance. But obviously we've got our opinions on outdoor consumer units and the way that, if they are done, they should be done in terms of backing them up and putting them in enclosures and the temperature and all that sort of stuff. We won't reopen that little nugget, but I'm hoping that if it can attract the right installers into it that aren't focused purely on speed, that some of these things around smoke detection, around the testing and everything else, it's an opportunity to suddenly bring that home from an era of 50 years ago to a modern day era, where actually then the safety is improved. There's a lot more work there for electricians and plumbing heating engineers upgrading pipe work and radiators and everything else, and actually bringing these homes up to a more modern standard, all because we are working towards making that home a warmer or more efficient home. And I think that's such an opportunity, like you say, that it shouldn't be. I'm just hoping it's not squandered, but we'll see. I mean, looking at this Warm Homes document here, so I've got a little graph here in front of me that shows it's from MCS, the domestic solar PV deployment since 2010, and it's in number of installations in millions and gigawatt capacity, and so in 2020 we're down at kind of tiny numbers like 0.01 million, and it has a sharp increase from 2010 to 2015 around the feed-in tariff time, and it gets up towards in 2015 gets up towards the about 0.8 million of installations, and the gigawatt capacity sat at like 3 gigawatt, if I'm reading that right, and then it steadily starts to increase till about 2021, and then 2021 it just unleashes and shoots up, and we're now, or 2025 as it ended, we were sat at 1.6 million installations and gigawatt capacity of 6 gigawatt of install capacity. Now, I'm trying to work out that is 1.6 million installations is a lot of installations, but there's a hell of a lot more that can go on. And so I'm looking at that trend line. I'm like, well, when does that plateau again? Because it's an extremely steep plateau trend line at the minute. And I'm like, well, if that continues to go up, we're going to need so many more installers to service that. And it goes back a little bit, I suppose, to what Mike was on about from the Happy Electrician of this era of abundance and this perception of abundance. And I think it's hard sometimes when you're an installer and you're getting beaten on jobs and things like that to think that there's, the market is just extremely tight, and it does go through peaks and troughs. That's a solar coaster, but something like this Warm Homes grant or Warm Homes loan, 'cause it sounds like it's going to be split between two things depending on the household income, that can unleash an extra layer of abundance to a lot of installers. And I'm just hoping that it's unleashed correctly so that the really good quality installers get the jobs, because otherwise the good quality installers will just not entertain that type of work. It's tricky.
It is tricky. You want that high skilled labour force, don't you, doing exceptional work, delivering value rather than just rushed, rinsed and repeat. And the government have had lots of lessons with this. You look at cladding on buildings, which was all the rage, and then obviously after Grenfell and that terrible thing that happened, taking it all away from buildings and recladding again. And you're dead right with the point you made earlier about what's the big success in going fitting this stuff to have it go wrong and then need to be replaced or repaired, and you're just driving more costs into the taxpayers' pockets with that. They need to focus much more on the quality of what's been done rather than the speed it's been done at. Those two things very rarely go together, do they? Speed and quality. It's just not coexisting in that way. And we're not asking for a lot more time on most of these projects when we're talking like this. It's not that we want an extra week or a fortnight doing it. It's generally a day or two.
It is.
Job by job level. So it's not that much of a big deal, really, if we just take our time and have some proper management around how this scheme's going to work. And I'll be interested to see how the access to the funding's going to work, if it's going to go through MCS, if it's going to be through local authorities, or if it's direct to the consumers. I don't know quite how that's going to play out. That'll probably be the gatekeeping side of it, which will determine if it's a success or not.
Yeah, the way that and again, my limited research, because like I said, this main document only came out yesterday onto the .gov website. The way that I can kind of see it working is probably similar to how the feed-in tariff worked, and that was where to access the funding, and probably how the bus grant works as well, having limited kind of knowledge of that in my business, but where you would have to prove competency via MCS to access the funding, and probably provide the MCS certificate to enable you as an installer to get the funding that has been pre-approved. I would have thought that you'd go through a process where the property gets assessed, the price gets submitted, the funding gets approved, but the funding doesn't get unlocked until you've proved that a system has been installed and that it's got the relevant paperwork around the MCS certificate. So when the feed-in tariff was around, you had to provide the MCS certificate, a fully paid invoice. You didn't have to provide any photos or anything, but even things like that, we've mentioned this around MCS, whether or not there's an AI thing that can be used where it is looking for systems that look like they're in lofts or this, that, and the other, where it goes, actually, that doesn't meet the modern requirements of it. And it's whether or not people writing these documents know enough about the wider issues of solar and battery installations to actually put things like that in place, or if they think that as soon as someone gets that MCS sort of tick of approval, that the jobs will be absolutely fine. And I doubt they're that naive, but it will be interesting to see if they put any other quality measures in, because that would be a really great gatekeeper, to use your word, in making sure that these installations are done properly, because these companies would only do it once or twice before they realise that actually they need to rethink how they're actually doing installs.
Yeah, I mean, whether that's the world of spot checks like you went through last year, where they're going out at random and picking into people's work, it's probably quite a hard thing to do looking at the volume that's anticipated, or utilising photographs and AI to try and flag some of these things up. And I think MCS do need to do more of that, where the roof, for the number of hooks and stuff that have been claimed on the certificate, there's a photograph of that to evidence it. I don't think that's too difficult to do, and AI, as we know from our development skills, it is perfectly capable of seeing if that is what's in the image. So that's something that really could be done, and if installers and installation companies know they're going to have to do that, then those hooks are going to be getting fitted. And we actually had the brass neck on this install next door to the house we've been working. We almost couldn't believe there was like 6 panels on this bottom row. We were looking at the bottom rail, and there's 3 or 4 hooks on it, and the space in between. One of them, I'd said to Matty, that looks like 3 meters, and he's like, I think it's more like 4. And
Wow.
people are doing that, and you can see it in plain sight, and you just wonder what is going on out under some of these arrays. And as people are rushing, and it's all about volume, they're the things that start getting missed. The odd hook off a rail here, the bird guard maybe not being put across the top where no one can see. All these kind of tricks that get pulled. The only thing that I think will really help us is the fire service are really interested in solar PV safety at the minute. We've been in conversations around that, and they do have a good voice into government around this kind of stuff. And I'm sure they'll be concerned about large-scale deployment of all this stuff, because it's them who has to go out and deal with this when it does go badly wrong. And hopefully that they'll be pushing at levers to try and have some elements focused on quality and the way this stuff is actually being fitted.
Yeah, you're right. In terms of, they will definitely have an interest in this because, like you say, it's their firefighters that are going to be having to enter these buildings to save people. That the fire may not be anything related to the solar PV or battery, but it's the fact that it's in there then becomes a problem for them. So it will be nice if they can try and point to documents like the PAS, and I know we've got the new regs coming out and all that, and we're I'm sure we'll go through that at some point, but it's whether or not we can really try and steer this in a really quality direction rather than in a direction of speed and volume, because that's where things start to fall down. And I've got another graph here. I'm like the graph man today. And this one's slightly more interesting because it's around battery storage installations, because solar PV, we've got quite a long history of that, and we had the feed-in tariff, which stimulated quite a lot of growth. And the only thing we've really had with batteries is the VAT rebates, not rebates, reductions in it. So it was, there was all this around charging 5%, but then some of the installation had to be at 20%, and it was such a mess. But now it's all zero rated, which is really good. So this graph goes back to September 2023 and finishes in March 2025. And so it starts in September at the total number of installations. So this isn't in millions, this is in thousands. This is how much different the quantity is in the battery side of things. And I don't even know where that is. It looks like September 23 looks to be like 1,000 or something like that. And the cumulative gigawatt hour capacity is like 0.01 or something like that. It's like tiny. But then you get even just into March 2024, you're around 5,000, about 5,000 installations with a gigawatt capacity of 0.05. And to flip right to the final point there is March 2025, so a year on from that, we're up at like 28,000, what's that say? Installation capacity in existing properties since, So we're up at like 28,000 installations there, and 0.27 gigawatt hours of capacity. So that has got an equally steep trend, and I think that trend, certainly in batteries, I think is going to just continue on, because there's certainly with heat pumps and other piece of equipment, batteries are kind of the key to it all, and it's been the missing jigsaw piece to the whole like energy equation that we've been waiting for, really, because this time of year we've just been doing a price for an installation, and the customer already has a feed-in tariff registered system, and during the summer months, sort of 3 or 4 months in the middle, he exports more than he imports, and so that to a solar and battery installer is like music to your ears, isn't it? You can install a battery and save that energy, but it's really the beginning of the year and the end of the year that he's really interested in. And we did a calculation and a design looking at how much he would produce at the beginning and end of year. And he was something like, I think it was December, he was importing 516 kilowatt hours, let's say, in that month. And he wasn't obviously exporting anything. But adding I think a 3.5 or a 5 kilowatt hour solar PV system peak was, I think it added something like 80 kilowatt hours to it. And you kind of like, that 80 has just been drank by that consumption. Whereas battery storage, we're able to actually offset some of that import to actually allow it to be purchased during the cheaper window. And again, that's what this document kind of mentions around. It actually references about batteries being able to be used to buy power at the cheaper rate. So that kind of shows that they're thinking a little bit more, not just about generating the power, but when it could be purchased to help the grid, but also to run the properties as well on cheaper imported power.
Yeah, the tariffs is like another part of that, isn't it? We're not quite sure how that's going to play out over the next 5 or 10 years, but you'd think there'll be elements there where there is those low cost slots. I think they'll move around a lot more, and that's probably due to the rollout of batteries that we'll see that. That is, like you say, it's the key, isn't it, to the door with that. You can have people on different off-peak slots because they've got a battery. And, we see, is it the Cozy tariff, I think, from Octopus, where there's a little slot in the morning, there's another slot at midday, and then one overnight. And you don't need a huge battery bank to make it work with a heat pump if you've got access to those slots, because that's a misconception. It's not as cheaper as it would be to have it all at once overnight. I don't think. I don't thoroughly understand how the tariffs work, if I'm being honest. But there's a parity there where you can bring your average purchase cost of energy down to a sensible level to make a heat pump an attractive option financially, as well as the carbon reduction thing. And it's the battery that enables that. And it's not just with a heat pump; it can be normal consumption as well. Not everyone's going to have a home suitable for a heat pump. If we're in blocks of flats and stuff, there's still elements of load shifting that can be done for those people, and it brings more control of energy into consumers' hands, I think, which is why spending taxpayer money on the batteries is no bad bet, I don't think. The opposite to that is that we're investing a lot at the grid scale. So we see the big battery banks. There's one near Beverley, I think it's to do with Dogger Bank, where they've put a huge battery system in at a grid scale level, really expensive. And same for field solar arrays, which all contribute to generating power that goes into the grid. But there's the issue of distributing that. And, if you've got this at the point it's been used on people's homes, I think that's probably a better play for taxpayers' money. And I'm not just saying that as someone who fits this stuff on houses. That's an easy thing to say for that reason. I genuinely believe that is a better way to approach it based on the technology that's available, and getting that value for taxpayers, creating jobs as well. That's all good for the economy. It makes sense. It's just the delivery of it and how we can get the quality there. So I don't know how you see that if you were in charge of all of this. How you'd actually. I've been thinking myself, how would I structure it to try and encourage quality and installers to want to do it? Would it be best if it's like a package size system that you're trying to spread around as many people as possible? So I don't know, say 6 or 8 panels and a 5 kilowatt hour module and a 5 kilowatt inverter with a kind of envelope of funding around that enables a good quality install? Or is it more case by case basis and proposal and assessment? And I don't really know, if I'm honest. It's quite a hard one to really resolve, I'd say.
Yeah, I think what it would, and reading into this a little bit more, it looks like there is, you do have to prove kind of the benefits of the system. So it's not just necessarily somebody wants a system because they like the technology. It's more, there has to be a notable difference in the quality of that property once the system has been installed, which, just by nature of fitting it, even if you like the technology, 9.8 times out of 10, there's going to be a really meaningful difference in that property's quality because you've got your own generation. And I think, just to touch on that kind of trying to fight against whether or not you do grid scale or the the smaller scale stuff. I think one of the real superpowers of microgeneration is that it's micro, and the fact that it's in within people's homes, and everybody's kind of playing their own part. So for when you roll something like this out, I think if this was, you know, a massive funding package released for grid scale batteries, no one would really feel the difference of that in their, you know, even if it brought the energy price down slightly. Not, and I might be wrong about this, but I don't think it'd have the same impact as you getting a battery and solar PV system on your house, reducing your import and therefore reducing your bill. And I think, why try to make something that works so successfully at a micro scale? Why invest everything in making that a grid scale product when it's proven that it works really well in a micro way? Like, why not double down on the fact that of trying to unlock more people that have a lower income to actually get their own microgeneration, and kind of give them a bit of control over when they charge it and everything. But in terms of how I would roll it out, I think, like any government thing, it's going to be open to people abusing it. And I know they'll obviously be very worried about that, because they've gone through the whole COVID side of things. You know, not this government, but the government in general have been through the whole COVID side of things, where people ripped off the COVID loans and the bounce back things and all that sort of stuff. So they will be worried about that. And so I think you'd have to link it to something, and that they're obsessed with the EPC side of things. I think mainly because it's the only real way they can easily see within a certificate what improvement has been made. Now, the whole EPC things, when you actually look at them, they seem so old and archaic, don't they? They're kind of like, I remember speaking to a customer and they said, look, they've recommended that we get, what is it, like ground mounted, like geothermal energy or something. It was like some weird thing. It's like, I live in a flat, like, what am I going to do? It was like some crazy recommendation, but it's just because it's the standard recommendations. They're not actually that personal to that property. They're just telling you to improve the EPC of this property. You could get solar PV, you could get an SOS heat pump, you could get solar thermal, or all this sort of stuff, and they're not actually that specific. But I think you'd have to link it to something like that to actually try to make it easy for people to see how the property's been improved. So you'd almost want to try and improve the EPC process to make that reflect the benefits of getting solar and battery in a greater way, or make it more personal to that property rather than it necessarily just being a tick box exercise. So a very, very difficult puzzle to crack. But I think looking at what the home consumes, looking at how that family consumes energy in terms of when they're buying it in, do they have an EV charger, are they getting a heat pump, and trying to make it similar to what we do for private customers in terms of, you know, that we're doing now before any of this funding is available, trying to make it based on the similar arguments that we have, I think is probably going to be the best way to allow people to get the most out of it, because we're already having these conversations about how it's going to benefit the property and the home. So why not try and carry them on? The only difference is it's being funded either entirely or partly by this Warm Homes Plan. But I don't envy the government trying to make sure that none of that money is abused, and they probably have a feeling that, you know, it's inevitable that some of it is going to be abused.
Yeah, I'm sure that will happen. It's the gatekeeping around it that'll stop it, and if that's going to sit in MCS's lap, then they're going to have to make sure they do a good job of that. I think with the combination of the heat pump, the solar, and the battery all coming together, as you said right at the start of this conversation, is the way to probably approach it. So if they were, I guess they're maybe going to be encouraging consumers to take that leap rather than just adopt one technology or other. We'll see how that plays out, but that makes sense, because that seems to offer more value, I would say, because we mentioned about the upheaval of the actual physical act of having the work done. It's all kind of condensed into one activity rather than spread out for a few different visits and different times your house has been pulled apart. So that's more attractive to the homeowners. But the cost side of that as well, you're not paying for people coming at different times and getting things set up quite right. And so it all works and it's designed as a kind of system. I think that's sometimes where this stuff falls down, where the solar and battery company maybe aren't aware of what the heat pump is going to be doing, the amount of power it's going to need and when it might need it. And same way around, the company who's specifying the heat pump maybe is limiting what they're doing a little bit because they don't know there's going to be a battery in play in the solar panels. So that all has to be joined up to deliver good value, I think. And it's going to be exciting to see what happens. I think any kind of injection of impetus to the industry and, you know, getting essentially, from our point of view, stuff that falls out the sky turned into power. People not drawing as much energy from the grid and paying for it every time they do so. I think that's got to be a good thing and a positive. And it's just going to be interesting to see how it all maps out when we get the meat on the bones around these policies. And I'm definitely going to send Jason a message and see if he'd be interested in coming on if he knows a bit more about it. I suspect he will, and really go through it in a bit more detail with someone like Jason.
Yeah, I think, you know, as two installers, we see the final little leg of this, don't we? And I think on something that's come out that's so fresh, we need to start to see what that meat, that the actual meat on the bones is, because if it's going to be a really limited batch of people that can actually get it, then it's most probably not going to, you know, draw in the massive, sort of the masses that fit this sort of equipment. But if it is open to people that are on, you know, middle incomes and things like that, then, you know, that captures a lot more people and you know, could be the difference between tipping them over the edge to partially fund it themselves and partially get a low interest loan through the government for it as well. And it'll be really interesting to see, because trying to do any sort of finance as a small company yourself to try and attract those people is a really hard thing to do. We've flirted with it and we've had it for sort of 6 months. We got asked for it twice, and we couldn't muster the faith or the balls to go for 0% interest, because the amount you have to put your price up, it's like 17% to cover what they charge you as a company to offer 0%. So for smaller companies like myself, having something that where somebody else in terms of the government is actually effectively being the funder, and you as a company aren't getting charged, you know, the uplift to offer 0% or, you know, a low percent interest on it is might actually be really handy for a lot of installers, because it tips customers that are right on the edge of going ahead with a project over the line, because they're able to get this cheap loan, even if it's not a grant where they, you know, never have to pay it back. Just getting it as a cheap loan might be enough just to tip them over the edge.
Yeah, you make a fantastic point there. There's 0% deals you often see are very much not 0%, and accountability is paid towards that charge to put onto the installation company. You know, the consumer sees the 0% figure, it's great, we're getting this interest-free loan, but it's just added somewhere else because someone else is bearing that cost. When the government are involved with these kind of things, those charges generally don't get applied because they can strike deals with banks and generally pressure them into doing stuff that they want them to do. And I suspect that's probably what's going to happen with the way these are funded. So those charges won't be there. It will be a genuine saving for consumers, which is a good thing. You know, and there's the flexibility of that as well. They may be able to push some of these timeframes out to maybe 10 years as opposed to maybe a 5-year arrangement, and split that cost down to see a financial return in a better light than otherwise. And it's going to be interesting. Like I say, we're speculating a little bit of how it is all going to look. But I want to stay positive about it as my kind of closing comment on it. I think we are scarred a little bit with what happened through the feed-in tariff era and the insulation stuff that we've seen and the cladding things that have gone wrong. And, you know, there are all those examples of it not playing out in the way we would have liked. But maybe this time it'll be different, and there'll be some good direction behind it that helps installation companies like ours. I don't think there's anything wrong with supporting businesses growing, installing this stuff. It's high-skilled work. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And also helps consumer take control of their heating and energy in their home to get best value for taxpayers.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously you mentioned there about helping small businesses like ourselves. Well, the best way to help us is actually to allow us to grow into doing more jobs. And you know, some companies want to increase the amount of jobs they're doing, or even just the security that they're booked up. Instead of 2 months in advance, they're booked up in 4 months in advance. And the security that offers you, and the ability to then take on apprentices or take on more staff, or spend more money on internal training, because you need to bring people along as the company grows. And I think anything like this does have a knock-on effect, because the money you spend helping people to get warmer homes, like I've said, you have that quote unquote wealth addition to a quality of life wealth increase. But as we've spoken about this, the obvious thing and the points that you've raised is that you do get a GDP upgrade, I suppose, because people are buying and selling and businesses rolling, because companies are able to win more work and do more jobs. And it's kind of like a double benefit to the government, because they're getting hopefully growth in the economy, because companies like ourselves maybe take on that extra member of staff either on site or in the office or both, and are training them up. It might be an apprentice that you take on, or it might be someone that's coming towards the end of the career and wants a nice office job now part-time, and just keeping that productivity rolling. And actually that money that they're putting into this, hopefully, or looking over the longer term, is actually then reaped in tax as we get bigger and more profitable and all of that. So it's really interesting. It's so fast paced. I don't usually have my laptop out during these. I'm not doing emails, I promise. But there's so much in here, and my company's Teams chat was open at the same time, so you may have heard the little pings on it. But even the office are talking about this now in sort of our office above us now and virtually. And yeah, just had another link sent through about the interest-free loan side of this, where potentially interest-free loans for properties to get this sort of stuff. And it's just ever-changing in terms of stuff, more and more information coming out. And I'm just literally having a little scan through it now. It says, what does it say here? The Warm Homes Plan targets help at low-income families alongside a universal offer to ensure that working families can feel the benefits of products that can cut their bills. Alongside this, the plan will support consumer choice for all households, so people can choose the technologies that work for them, as well as work for them as and when they want. Homeowners will be able to apply for government-backed low and zero interest loans to install solar panels, unleashing a rooftop revolution. These loans will also be available for batteries and heat pumps, making it easier than ever for every home to access clean energy technologies that can lower bills. Low-income households and those in fuel poverty could receive support that would cover the full cost of having solar panels put on their rooftop, or insulation installed, alongside new rules to ensure landlords invest in upgrades to cut bills for renters and social tenants. So yeah, and that's just something that I don't know when that was posted.
Well, that's another good angle on it, thinking of the renters. There's a lot of people in private rented accommodation, and if there's a potential there for them to benefit through that as well, that we saw that with the EV rollout, didn't we? It was primarily focused towards homeowners, and a lot of renters were kind of excluded from that because the landlords couldn't access the grants. So as long as it's been fairly apportioned in the way the money's been spent, and the landlords aren't gaming that system, I don't think they would be able to, in fairness, then that's a good move as well, I would say.
Yeah, and just scanning this as well, there's a part here that I might read out, and hopefully this isn't like being back at school where the teacher's reading stuff out. But the 3 pillars of the programme are direct support for low-income families. So low-income households will receive free of charge packages of upgrades, depending on what technologies are most suitable for their homes, backed by $5 billion of public investment. For example, families could receive fully funded installations of solar panels and a battery to the full average cost currently 9 to 12,000. I don't know where they got those figures from. But for social housing residents, this could mean upgrades to entire streets at the same time, lowering bills and improving warmth and comfort for whole neighbourhoods. The second pillar of this is an offer for everyone. So that's probably a bit different to some of the older sort of schemes out there, where it was very much targeting the lower income, fuel poverty side of things. So an offer to everyone. The government-backed zero and low interest loans program to get solar panels onto the nation's rooftops, and new rules that mean every new home will come with solar panels as a default. This plan will triple the number of homes with solar panels on their rooftops by 2030, making it easier for everyone who wants to get a heat pump, with a £7,500 universal grant for heat pumps, and the first ever offer of an air-to-air heat pump that can also cool homes in the summer, which is an interesting one. And then the final one, before the lesson is over, new protection for renters. Today, 1.6 million children living in private accommodation suffering from cold, damp or mould. The government believes in a simple principle that if you rent a home, private or social, a landlord has a responsibility to ensure that it is safe, warm and affordable. By updating protections for renters and supporting landlords to make these upgrades in a fair way over several years, an estimated 500,000 families will be lifted out of fuel poverty by the end of the decade. So you've got the support for the low income families, which you kind of think is a bit of a given on anything like this, really. I think the key one for me there is that middle part, because selfishly it probably affects us both more, which is an offer for everybody where people will be able to get a zero or low interest loan for solar PV on their property. Now, it will come down to delivery, like we've mentioned, and how easy that loan is to access and what we have to provide to get that loan. But I think that's potentially quite a big thing.
Definitely. It's going to be interesting to see how all that comes out, and I'm sure your team and my team won't be the only people speaking about this in our industries. It's going to be the talk of the sector, I think, even more so than that orange book we've got on the horizon. So way more interesting than electrical regulations and such as well, it's got to be said. And we'll see if it's the shot in the arm, I guess, that is really going to unlock that mass adoption phase that I think is I still think that is, I think it's started, if I'm honest. I do think that we are at that point now where it is really kicking up to that point. But until we're putting this stuff into everyday working class homes around the country of old style talk of the 80s, then we're not really there yet, are we? And I think this might be the policy change that helps deliver that.
Yeah, and like you heard and I saw on this graph that I look at, and the trajectory that we're on now in terms of solar PV and battery storage is that it actually showed a steeper curve than the feed-in tariff. So that's quite reassuring that actually these things are on the rise, and hopefully things like this will open up. So it's not, we're not all just targeting, the families that are on 80 grand or something like that, collectively a year or something like that. We're actually able to help for households that are on a combined income of 40 grand, 50 grand, with both the parents, if there are both parents there on, a 25, 26 grand job, being able to help them with their energy is one of those things that, like we mentioned right at the start, is probably more powerful than helping that person that's on, or that family that are on 100, 120 grand a year, because the energy cost means so much more to those people that are on the lower income. But equally, those people that are sat in the middle of that, where they're on, like I've said, 60, 70, 80 grand a year, where it can still be pretty tough at that level, especially with a big family. So unlocking it to allow more people to get this stuff, for me, is just a win-win, really. And obviously I would say that being in the industry, but just in general, making homes better, increasing the sector, and hopefully backing that up with good training, good installations. What could possibly go wrong, Mark?
It's an investment in the nation, isn't it? We see all the stuff with HS2 and railways and roads, and government and taxpayers have been spending money on stuff like that for a long, long time, and what better place to spend it than in the homes we all live in around the country? If we are going to see a decent quality of good kit being installed safely, delivering high skilled jobs, I think we've given that a good rinse through on its first outing. I do think we're going to have to come back to this.
We will.
When the policy is fully known and how all of this is actually going to work.
And get someone that knows it inside out.
Yeah, I think we've done a good job, to be fair, mate. You've really delivered on this, seeing as it's fresh out with your laptop to hand.
I'm just replying back to our Teams chat now to say...
Sell.
I'm just doing a podcast on it. Because they've asked if I've seen it. Just doing a podcast on it. There we go, send. So I think we've given that a good look over. It'll certainly be something that we'll be looking at in our business as well, and I'm sure within the group chats that we're in and everything, it'll be kind of the talk of it. But over the next month or so, it'll be interesting to see where that meat is, and hopefully we can all take advantage of it in a positive way to unleash more work for us, but also unleash another sector of consumer that really does want this stuff and it'll make a big impact for. Just start getting all those panels on roofs and hopefully done in a quality way.
Yeah, I'd echo that, and we'll certainly bring you updates through the Renewable Podcast as and when we get them. As Sam said at the start, we've got some really good guests coming up with episodes in the next few weeks. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you get notified when the episodes release. And if you head over to Spotify, we do have an option to get a week ahead of the schedule as well. So if you want to see next week's early, you can go over and do that. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.